Working our way through the agenda.
Yeah. And I just want to reiterate with Doug, one of the things that has commonly come up across all the sessions, not just in relation to the different issues people have raised, but also in the different presentations, is that there's clearly not one way to do ES. That there are a diversity of approaches, and it's really related to our institutional vetting and what we have in our midst. And so this is really a chance for us to share with each other what's worked in our different contexts, and then get a sense of how can we modify that in relation to sharing these kinds of ideas and experiences with each other. So when I looked over the list that we made yesterday afternoon, there's basically it breaks down into about 4 thematic areas with some subs. The first one is curriculum, which obviously fits well with the first workshop point, which is introductory courses, undergraduate, and specifically. But there were a bunch of different things that were talked about in there. First one was a question of what is curriculum for PhD students. How do we integrate science, social science, and humanities, and ensure there's a diversity of perspectives engaged? Self-learning models was brought up. Co-teaching versus individual teaching. And this is one that specifically comes up a lot in relation to introductory courses. How do you actually represent the social sciences, humanities, and sciences? Building eco-literacy and what is to be included, which again touches upon the integration of science, social science, and humanities, from numeracy to the humanities. The next thematic, which could also be connected in a way to curriculum, was environmental studies from theory to practice action. And the question, I think this was raised by a number of the students that were here, how do we transition these degrees into society? And I think the general impression we've gotten from faculty here in discussions was that there's a lot of opportunities to transition this. But I think it might be something for us to be considering in relation to curriculum, because it does seem to be a concern that's on students' minds. The next thematic was monetary, and there were various sub-themes under the monetary. There was the corporatization of the university and neoliberalization, budgetary issues and impact on curriculum, program philosophy, program practice, university debt and downloading the programs, and all the implications that has, and then undergrad to territoriality, trying to get bumps and seats basically. And then the last one, which I think is the most interesting one, and wasn't something we had anticipated, but I think it's become one of the core themes of this whole conference. It's passion beyond crisis programs. We are not just crisis programs, and we actually have to start with the passion. And a number of those points that were raised were that we have all this alumni out there in all these different kinds of organizations. We have these strong histories. We have an alternative vision, and we have the ability, because of our interdisciplinarity, to translate our discourses into various understandings and make our message heard and communicate our message in various ways. And the whole idea is that we need to be strong and hold on to what we are and not be swayed by neoliberalization, for instance, and just pull firm of that. And so I think that those are the 4 themes that we've heard come up over the past day and a half or so. So with that, a number of these do fit into, so for instance, the curriculum stuff can come up as part of the discussion in the question of what is introductory courses, which we have currently divided between undergraduate and graduate. And I think what we're saying, if we're going to do this in a large group, we basically spend time on the undergraduate questions and then move on to graduate. The question of the monetary issues obviously have a relationship to number 2. Right? We think in some way the question of placement of ES units in university organizational structures, as well as relation between interdisciplinary ES units and disciplinary units. And we could bring in those kinds of monetary questions and what does that mean, again, share with each other what has worked in our different programs that kind of respond to these things. And then the last one, passion beyond crisis programs. I know we can bring that up anywhere, and hopefully we'll keep on bringing that up. And I think it really fits nicely with it could fit nicely also with our fourth thing, which is continuing the process. Where do we go from here, and really realizing that we have strength in our networks and the way in which we can come together and draw from what we've learned from each other and really move forward in some sense. People are all right with like kind of thinking about it in that way, but we can obviously continue thinking about entities with regards to any of these particular topics.
Okay, so if that's a replaying of what the discussion has been so far, Jim and I are going to be facilitating discussion here. We've got at least until 2:30 or maybe 2:35. We've got these two issues. The first is curriculum, and we're starting with undergraduate, but we want to save some time for graduate. And then the second one, within that, the hour we've got here is going to be this question of organization within the university structure. Where do the interdisciplinary units best fit in? So we'll throw the conversation open. Perhaps we could, a starting point could be Ingrid's theme from yesterday, the separation of environmental sciences and social sciences. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? But then for our discussion right here, what does that mean for curriculum? I know in our unit, we at U of T, we very definitely have separated the two, and what we continually then spend our time in curriculum discussing is, in the sciences, how much of that curriculum do you devote to social science topics, and in reverse, and how much knowledge do you expect students in those two different parts to have of the other? Questions like that. So we'll throw it open for any questions at all having to do with undergraduate curriculum based on, as I say, not so much a normative, this is absolutely what it should be, but in your experience, can you tell us some stories about, and your curriculum planning, what seems to have worked or not worked? Nobody here has ever done any curriculum planning?
Yeah, Mike Thurber from the King's University College. I'll just jump in with we're kind of changing our introductory course this year, and so this is kind of a timely discussion for us. Historically, we've had a second-year class called Humankind in the Biosphere, and originally, some of you might know Harry Spalding. He's a bit more of a physical geographer than I am. I'm a human geographer, and it was sort of lowercase humankind and large capital letters and the biosphere. And then when he stepped out of ENBS and I came in, it became large capital letters, humankind, and then smaller emphasis on biosphere. So it fits right into some of the things we were discussing yesterday. And so what we've decided to do, and this might be playing into the dichotomy, I've been reflecting on this a little bit today, is we're actually going to create two courses out of this. So we'll continue to use Draper as our environment, and we're going to keep the humankind and the biosphere class, as it's called, but pull a lot of the social stuff that I've been bringing into it out of that. And we're starting a 200 level course, and this is important, this is for the discussion later. We've not had a first year class in environmental studies. The students have been taking all of their foundational courses, and then their second year have the first course. And what's been happening is our students go to all these foundational courses and they get fished out of our program before they've even met us. And so we're bringing in that first year course, and that's going to be an introduction in sustainability, and that'll be a bit more of the, it'll have a little bit of science in it, but it'll be a much more socially focused.
So that's another question. Where do you place your first year course? In first year or in second year?
Yeah.
In terms of recruitment, and then of course what's in your introductory course?
And we're putting it winter term so we can recruit in the fall for the course.
UNBC, we did just the opposite. When we reorganized and I got moved to another department along with a degree in environmental studies, we needed to put on a first year course as an introduction. And for us, it did a couple of things. One of which is we discovered our cohort didn't have a sense of themselves because they were in the first year courses in other units. And so we wanted them to come together, and for us it became a maintenance issue as well as an introduction to the basic themes. But it also turned out to be just the opposite. We ended up, as the intro course, it's fishing students out of other programs to come to environmental studies, and which was fine, according to my chair, as long as it wasn't her program, or preferably in other colleges. So I could fish in the other pools, just not next to mine. But and we've actually seen not only a net to the theft of students, but the students who are there in environmental studies actually are developing a better sense of who they are as environmental studies students. But at the same time, because we have a lot of people who are taking it as not so easy elective for everything from business to physics. We're also, because it's not restricted to environmental studies students, we get a lot of very interesting discussions about what those themes mean across different disciplines at a very young age. And the first year students are always more receptive to an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary perspective. The fourth years are very, very fixed. I am a fill in the discipline. But at first year, it actually opens them up a little bit to think about an idea. How do we deal with an environmental problem or climate change, or how we relate to our consumer practices, and not really care what the discipline is that we're talking about. And so we find that it's actually spreading a little bit of environmental awareness across other disciplines because they're talking about it in a very, it may say environmental studies, but we're just talking about problems. We don't bring a disciplinary lens to it.
So, Andy, is the course actually rooted in issues? Is it an issue-based course?
Not
or is it,
really. It's called Introduction to Environmental Citizenship because we made the theme, if you will, of the BA environmental citizenship. But environmental citizenship covers a lot of things. So we do talk about some problems like global, climate change, and the resource issues, and where Canada sits as an environmental citizen. But the students also really like the personal approach. So I do lectures on how can I green your individual lifestyle. I bring in show and tell. They eat a lot of homemade brownies and chocolate, and they go, but they learn about different ways of taking it from the global to the very, very personal, where do I go shop, that may have some alternatives. They also do a service project as part of the requirement. So they actually take the themes and they have to apply it in some way. And again, because it's citizenship, I've had students who go down and work in a soup kitchen. Poverty is an environmental issue. In our course, so they do that. They may work in the sustainability office at the university. We've had people go out and do environmental education or fish counts, so they get some hands-on learning because it's not really issued. They follow their interests. Almost everything becomes a learning opportunity for how it connects back to the environment.
I think this definitely is a question that we all wrestle with for the introductory courses: is how much is it actual issues, how much are you taking them through climate change, water, and so on, and how much is it the broader. If you look in pretty well any of the introductory environmental science texts, they start out with, well, here's on the science side, here's how the atmosphere, hydrology, and so on, we're in general. And then at the back end, they've usually got a little bit about culture and politics in general, but then the bulk of it, I'd say usually about 80% of these texts, is just working their way through different issues. And we've wrestled with that in our curriculum design. What is the appropriate balance between introducing students to particular issues and introducing them to the broader cross-cutting things? Anybody want to speak to that question as to how you've handled that in your programs?
At St. Mary's University, we are in a pretty new situation now because the environmental science program has been renamed. It was environmental studies, and it was renamed environmental studies simply because a new program emerged in the Faculty of Arts, which is called environmental studies. So we have science and studies at the same time now. And what we want to do, first of all, I would like to emphasize the same aspect of bringing students together from those branches of students in environmental studies and science have to take the same intro course.
So you have the one course
which is called Environmental Challenges.
And is that a first-year course?
It is a first-year course. And talking about issues versus science, this is a course that has a focus on issues because its main objective is to capture students' interest and stir their passion. And then in the next stage, usually in the second year, they have a pair of courses called both environmental science. One of them is focusing on the life sciences, the other one on the one that I teach, which I always emphasize, it's not about dead bodies, it's not non-life, it's about pollution, water, and energy resources. And it is then when we bring in the broader framework and the science basis. But it gets stirred also with a lot of hands-on activities. Students have to find out about environmental research on campus. They have to get in touch with professors in other departments. They have to know about what other students do and so on. But this is how we start. Our dilemma now regarding that background is concerns physics. When I first came to St. Mary's 10 years ago, I was shocked to hear about environmental science with no physics. and we even have a meeting when somebody suggested that we take physics out of the list of optional courses. I almost fell down. And now that I'm the coordinator, I can push things more effectively, and I think, physics is important. On the other hand, we have in the first year 2 biology, 2 chemistry, 2 math. So the program in the first year for first year students tends to be a little rigid if we add also physics courses. And one of my really key interests was here to hear about your experience regarding the presence of physics in principle, no matter when and how, but whether you found that physics was important. It was important for my education, at least. I know this from my experience. And I know that people obviously could survive without physics. I've been there for 10 years. The students are still well alive and doing a good job where they are going. They are well received. So a world without physics in environmental science seems to work. But I'm wondering if we can make it better.
But this is always the question, because you can apply this to anything. Could we imagine an environmental studies without sociology? Oh no, that would be the end of the world. And without philosophy and so on. And everybody tends to feel, naturally enough, that their subject is the absolute keystone that has to be there. But you've only got so much space in a curriculum. So the other observation I'll make, what I've learned from designing these courses, is that issues, the people on the science side, it makes a lot of sense to divide by issues because the science is actually different, whether you're talking about air or water and so on. Whereas for those of us, something like Stephen's course where he's talking about human attitudes toward nature, well, that doesn't vary that much by issue, or the kind of thing I do, environmental law and policy. You need to introduce it across the board. So you've got an inherent difference between the sciences and social science in terms of this approach of how you deal with issues. And then you're back to this question, well, do you really separate out sciences and studies, or are you trying to bring them in? So anybody want to speak to either the specific question of how important physics is, or how important anything else is, or continue this discussion of how we handle issues? And then also, I think this question of just our introductory courses, I know we are all trying to grab students. We're trying to turn them on. And we quite deliberately introduced a first-year student. Stephen is one of our very powerful teachers who is very good at getting students engaged. And we've got him out there as a recruitment. And that's what people do.
But my understanding is the course that you're currently doing at U of T, that's not historically, it hasn't been done in this way. This has actually been a change in the curriculum.
Yes, and we did it for the same reason that Mike was talking about at King's College, that we wanted to bring in a first-year course to, as I understand it, Stephen, to help grad students. Do you want to speak a little to the first-year course?
Yeah, I think that that was the idea that we talked about with Ingrid when she was director of the center, that first-year students didn't have a 100-level intro environment course. We had the 200-level courses that Doug would team teach with a scientist, a social scientist, sometimes an economist, someone from the humanities. But we didn't have a single professor intro course. So the idea was, U of T is a large university. Many people have intro to sociology, intro to anthropology, etc. at the 100 level. Why not have one at the environmental studies level 100? And so we launched it 2 years ago. And the first year there were 370 students, capacity of the classroom. Second time it was 500 students, capacity of the classroom. So there is a lot of interest. And those continue to take Doug's course and Karen Ng's course at the second level with 450 students, etc. So they're seeing, the idea was, let's get scientists, social scientists, students who are just kind of interested in the area, to be galvanized, to be interested and see that maybe they could find a place here. So one way that we bring the science in is actually having scientists come in. So Karen Ng might come in and talk about aquatic issues around how she approaches it, and we'll have people from different disciplines come in so they can see reflection of some of their own interests, whether it be scientific, social scientific, with some of the guest speakers. So that's one way that we try to broaden it.
What's the overall framework of the course?
The overall framework is kind of thinking of the human relationship to the non-human world, in a sense. What is our role here as persons? So, and then we look at some classic
I
texts.
thought it was hot, sexy issues that'll turn students on and get them taking our program.
Well,
Isn't that the framework?
yeah, like Thoreau, real hot and sexy, like Thoreau and Muir. But part of the idea is to just whet their appetites for thinking about environment as an aperture for their university education, and to kind of get that passion a place in the university, a place for them to explore at the university.
Stefan?
Just to add my experience, I went to U of T, I think a year or two before this first year course was put in, and I didn't really find environmental studies till my third year. The first year I took a whole bunch of other courses. I ended my second year. By my second year, I had filled my entire docket with philosophy courses, and so I didn't really start doing any environment until having to take 5 to sort of fit in enough environment courses to sort of get to fill in the major. And something like I would have loved to take a first year course, but at the time it wasn't offered. And then by the second year, I didn't. You had to take. The other thing is with prereqs. I could only take one environment course in second year because it was the introductory course, which means by second year you can only take one course, and in third year you have to then complete your major. I basically had to do entirely environmental courses the last couple of years. And so I think as one advantage of just having to do a first course in first year, it gives you the opportunity of taking 2 or 3 environment courses second year, and sort of it broadens the scope of what you can do just that way.
Yeah, and if I could just add, building on what Stefan said, one reason Ingrid Stefanovic thought this would be a good idea, she saw the writing on the walls at U of T, where numbers and bums in seats spoke volumes to the administration, and they were thinking of doing something with the environment. When they saw the interest at the 100 level and 200 levels, it was harder for them to, in a sense, close down what we had established. That's part of that agenda, but they saw the interest level and that registered with them. So there was a strategic view as well, and this was a strategic decision as well as a pedagogical decision.
The other issue that we always wrestle with, above and beyond this question of issues, is how do you handle skills, how much you have them injected into each course, and how much you have a standalone skills or methods course, and then how you handle professional practice, giving students exposure to off-campus experience. And so these are, again, I think things that in any environmental studies curriculum people need to wrestle with.
So we have 2 required courses in the first year, and I'm not going to remember their names. One is Earth in Our Hands, but I think that's the Taking Action course.
Is that,
Or is the Taking Action of,
I think Taking Action is one is the
and Earth in Our Hands is the other.
Is the introduction.
Okay, so but they're both required in the first year, and get about 500 students. Obviously, not all environmental studies students. So that is one of the ways. That's right, that we attract students from other parts of the university, and some of them will then switch into environmental studies after. So the Earth in Our Hands is taught by Peter Timmerman, and he's his background. I wouldn't know how to describe his background. Yeah, he really is a Renaissance kind of person. So he includes just the thinking about environmental issues through the ages, right? He does
It's an environmental history of the first half of the course.
Yeah, it's a real survey, and he's just got this encyclopedic kind of knowledge, which is fascinating, and draws a lot of students. Clearly, draws a lot of students. And then the other one, the Taking Action, is Anders Sandberg's course, and where students have to address very specific issues. So they get some background. Both are year-long courses, as well. So the first part of the term is just that kind of understanding environmental action, and then the second half, the students have to create teams and define a problem, define an action, and then take that action and report back to the whole class on what they did and what the impact was.
So you're building the off-campus experience into that first year course.
Except a lot of the action is on campus.
And I think one of the really interesting things that he's doing is this whole campus tour, and he gets the students to be in different to learn about different parts of the campus, the history of them, and what they tell us about our relationship to nature. So the campus becomes a site of learning in the same way that you could actually bring that into the larger urban center that we live in, and then we're wearing. So there's this whole sense of this kind of reflexive praxis process going on.
And he has actually expanded that into the Jane Finch community. So we've brought at times busloads of people from the local neighborhood into the campus to take part in the tours, and also to add their own experience of being in that environment or being excluded from that environment in a lot of cases.
Okay. I think I just want to add too that the Peter Timmerman course, The Earth in Our Hands, is actually has a lot of similarity and resonances to what Stephen is talking about in relation to the kind of worldviews and getting a sense of all the different perspectives from science, social science to humanities, different cultures bring different perspectives on our relationship to nature, and really find students a way to kind of really situate themselves and have that kind of sense that there are different ways of thinking about this and different ways of engaging, get really interested in that way.
Okay, Simon.
Interesting question for Barbara. Is that first year course, or both first year courses, are they closed to just students?
No.
It's any student in your.
Any student, yeah.
Okay.
And hence a recruitment tool.
Yes, yeah.
Any other? Yes.
Yeah, ours is also like that. First year course, a lot of students from other disciplines are taking, because we made it a course that is a requirement, a course that meets the science requirement for the BA students. So lots of students from conflict resolution studies, international development studies, they coming to take that course just to meet the science requirement, and they end up changing over and moving to environmental studies. So it is a requirement.
You also see it as a means of attracting students. Okay, any other comments that anybody would like to make? We're going to go on to graduate courses in a few minutes, but we'll go to PEI and then back to the UNDC.
Coast to coast.
We got the two extremes.
Yeah. One thing I struggle, and I do teach an Introduction to Environmental Studies course, is the...
Is that what you call it? Is that literally
yes,
the title?
Yes. And currently it's a second year course because we are a minor program at UPEI at this point in time, and students don't declare a minor until their second year. But it will become, with our proposal for our Introduction to Environmental Studies, it will move down to the 100 level, with obviously it can change. But what I struggle with in teaching that course, which attracts probably every department on campus to that course, even students who are not going to go on the minor, we get a lot of people take it as an elective because of an interest, is the diversity of things that you can cover and how to limit that so that you don't feel like you're only skimming the surface. And that's the challenge I struggle with. So, I've taught it twice now, and the most recent iteration was trying to sort of introduce some broad things related to ethics and science and policy and economics at the beginning, and then trying to apply those to different issues. But then you felt like you were again just skimming the surface, and I'm just curious, how do people make those decisions about what is critical to really include in that introductory course that is sort of the building blocks for future courses?
I guess one suggestion I would put out, I'd have two thoughts. The first is that maybe an introductory course skimming isn't all that bad. Mm-hmm. But then the question that we've always wrestled with is, in deciding that what's going to be in there, how does it relate to the courses they're going to be taking in second, third, and fourth year? Do you consciously try and introduce them to each of the subjects that they're going to at least have available as a possibility to take, or do you have it a little more narrow, a little more focused. And you can do it either way. I've always thought, though, that the function of an introductory course was to actually introduce. And so you should somehow relate your course design to the rest of your curriculum.
Yeah, I always went back to Leopold. I got really damaged by Leopold and having to do that at the University of Wisconsin where he taught. But back in the 40s, Leopold was writing about the same problem. And his opinion was that we tend to give things to students, bits and pieces, and then expect them to do the integration. And we can't even do that sometimes at the PhD level. We give bits and pieces to PhD students, and it goes right over their heads. And what's my discipline? And so I really teach a first-year course at any level as a way of saying exactly that. You are going to be taking another 3.5 years of stuff. I want you to be able to think through what that means and to give you some tools for integrating it yourself, because the odds are we're not going to be able to do the integration for you, but we need to help you do the integration. And so first-year class is to set them up in a way to see what the relevance is of all the bits they are going to get, and hope that they can do it with help. Because if you leave them to integrate on their own, some of my colleagues can't do that. Why would we expect first-year students to do that? I don't know. I know at times I've found banks of syllabi very helpful. I know in the States, people put out banks of syllabus of various introductory courses at different levels, and maybe ESAC or somebody has already done that. But particularly, I like to look at what other people are doing and plagiarize with attribution, of course. And I'm always happy when people plagiarize me for that sort of things, because it's just helpful to say, oh, well, I hadn't thought about that, or somebody else is doing it differently. And maybe one of the things that could come out of this is a bit of, now the drawback of syllabi banks is that you have to keep them current, and somebody has to ensure they're current. But particularly you're going, I just don't know what to teach this semester. What do I do? I'm bored with what I'm doing. Going and looking at what other people are doing in first year or second year.
Yeah, we've done that a couple of times. We've had students put together surveys and courses, and I like your idea that at the end of the afternoon we're going to be talking about where do we go from here. Yeah, maybe one thing we could be doing is just sharing our course outlines a little bit more. Might be useful. Yes?
I want to get this in before you move on to the graduate, because the courses that I have taught
at which university?
U of T, are not in an environmental studies program. But I will say that I walked into one. I didn't do the curriculum, but I was given a hand to alter it. Dealt with women, and mostly it was in a gender studies program. But the basis of the course, when I walked in, and which I added to from my own background, was an understanding of nature in that sense, the whole environment, women, nature thing. And then another undergraduate program was created relative to a project I was working on, and then I was asked to co-teach what I didn't actually, but it was also had the same focus. So there's a growing tendency to put environment into the middle of other courses. But this was the basis of the course. Those were the first two lectures that were given. Were on that, and it was very highly encouraged by the director of the program to continue to do that throughout the course. The second course was even more. It was about women and environment, and it was a full year course in the women and gender studies program.
Yeah, absolutely. The context we're working in is that environment has come into all parts of the university.
Yeah, that's
and so then here we are, this interdisciplinary unit, recognizing that it's everywhere, and that we need to be bringing in all some exposure to those different disciplines.
So do you do that by staying within the environmental studies program, or what I'm wondering is if you can't recognize that there's an interest? And I looked at these courses and went, nobody other than the people, the faculty who are teaching, are really, there's no structure for this to happen. It's happening on its own, which is fine. But should that be acknowledged?
We're going to be talking about that. Our second agenda item is just how to structure this within the university. And inevitably we're going to talk about this notion of hub and spoke, the relationship between the interdisciplinary unit and teaching of environment in the discipline-based departments. So we will get there. Barbara, quickly, and then Randy.
Do you have an opportunity to cross-list courses?
I think no, but there's a lot of leeway for people to wander into different courses, across the campus. So I think both of these courses were third year, I think. So I'm not sure about the second one after that. But I'm pretty sure that I know the one that I taught was definitely open.
Randy and then Stephen.
Given the difficulty of teaching an intro course because it has to go across so much material, and you worry about breadth versus depth, like really one day on environmental history and one day on environmental literature, well, really, what can you say? Does anybody take a problem-based learning approach and really do a focus? They'll take a topic, oil sands or whatever, and you look at it from a whole bunch of different lenses.
Yes, we've done that on occasion. Paul, do you want to speak to yours?
Before our department grew so incredibly large that made it difficult, we had the second term of our first year course be entirely problem-oriented. We set a particular problem, large, messy problem, broke the students into small teams, and they were to take on a persona of some actor or interest group in the problem, research it from that point of view, and then we had mock hearings, whether it was to a blue ribbon panel or environmental assessment group or whatever. And I was just trying to remember the topics that I was involved in. This goes back a few years. But we did 2 years, we did the question of burial of nuclear waste in the Canadian Shield, genetically modified foods, what would a provincial policy about that look like, provincial water policy, plan review of the Niagara Escarpment Plan, periodic review, diamond mining in the Northwest Territories. These are first year students. The first year course gave them a sort of a introduction, but not thematic. This week is environmental history, next week is ecology. We threw them into it, cold turkey as it were. Let them work it out, gave them lots of advice, and they did amazing stuff. We brought people in from outside. I remember, Doug, if you were one of the people who came in as an adjudicator of the student presentations, they did an amazing job. That was our philosophy of let the students, it's like taking an infant and throwing them in the deep end of the swimming pool, letting the students figure out what are the dimensions of the problem. Somewhat constrained because each student was in a small group of a particular actor identity, but they really learned by doing it.
Yes, we've done that in a first year course, and then I did it just this past year in a fourth year capstone course in which we were letting students look back, what's it been like to be in an interdisciplinary environmental studies program, and what did I get out of that now that I'm about to graduate, and I used the subject matter of carbon capture and storage, supposing you were going to be getting a job in that particular field, what could I draw on from what I do? I'm not sure, to be honest, how much. In the introductory courses I do now, I don't do it. I don't know. It's one approach. I'm not sure. We had Stephen, I think.
Yeah.
Did you want to quickly respond to this?
Yeah, that question.
Okay, and then Stephen will go.
Yeah. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I did it. I got stuck teaching research methods to environmental studies students, which was like the worst course to ever teach. And I thought, well, I just don't want to teach a research methods course. So I started them off doing an actual environmental audit of the university campus. We ran that for 3 years, and the university actually so they had to look at every aspect of operation on the campus, or sections of it, and they would write recommendations. We actually changed things on campus to respond to that, and then I expanded it out to the local college. I ran a couple of audits on their campus, and they changed things. And right before I got taken off, we were actually working on the hospital to run an audit. So it was a problem-based thing. And they learned a lot of different ways of doing things from talking to people and figuring out problem solving, and it worked really well, but it was a third-year course. I'm not sure it would have worked at a first-year course because they were all dealing with real people, and that's really embarrassing when it blows up in a small town. So you want third-year students who are a little more functional, but the good thing for the students is a lot of them would put it on their resume that they did this audit, and so it became not only a teaching tool, but something to talk about with a future employer. That they actually did something concrete, and they could point to things the university had done, and it was close to home. So it was a problem-based thing that actually worked very well.
Yeah, a couple of considerations that come to play, at least when we were fashioning the intro courses. Yes, what are the other professors doing in the second, third, and fourth years, and how can you complement that trajectory? Secondly, what resources do you have? At the U of T, they've cut back so significantly on TA resources. So in our intro course, we do not have enough hours for TA tutorials, TA-led tutorials. So I learned from other colleagues who are teaching 800 students, look, you've got to make this simple because there's not going to be any debrief. You have a 2-hour lecture segment, that's it. So rather than doing a lot of academic articles, we went with kind of more straightforward articles, say a Leopold article, Land Ethic, or a Thoreau piece, and then moving into certain other pieces that are a little more contemporary, of course, but realizing they don't have that kind of degree. So part of it's contextual in terms of the resources that one's had. I mean, and also where you fit into the galaxy of courses and instructors in your program. What can you bring that they're not going to necessarily highlight? Secondly, a new course that I just taught last year for the first time, Environment, Culture, and Film. It's a 300-year course in the anthropology department at the ESAC campus. But I saw this as an intro course too. I mean, just to throw out there, introducing environmental themes through feature films. And it's an interesting way of bringing this in. So I just throw that out there. Again, this was tailored at the 300 level with 70 students. But one could think about that as an intro approach too, using feature films and developing a thematic intro to environment course around those kinds of films.
Okay, procedurally, we also wanted to talk about graduate, if there's anything that you would like to bring up. And then before we break, have at least a little bit of time to talk about just how our programs fit within the organization of the university. So I'll go back to undergraduate. Is there another point that anybody would really like to bring up to their own experience or a question on undergraduate curriculum? Yes?
Just based on what you say, some have said, well, we use this particular textbook. Other people have gone to, readings, student-chosen readings, depending on the context. I'm just wondering if people have particular perspectives on that, that approach. Like, do you go for a textbook and try to make it fit the way you're doing it? Do you go for readings? How do you make that decision? What decisions have you all made?
I'll speak quickly. My own introductory, the way I structure, I looked through the standard environmental sciences texts, and then I was looking through environmental sociology texts and environmental geography, and I ended up going with course readings because I had a particular picture I wanted to have. And using a text locks you into their particular picture. Anybody else want to speak to questions of text versus reading?
I'll just add just earlier, because I TA'd this course a couple times, and it's the same as yours. I know he's in the process of actually trying to create a textbook that's broad. Because his problem was that sometimes it's too focused on the science, or sometimes it's too focused on the humanities. It doesn't have any historic dimensions. And so how do you actually get something that's broad in the environmental studies context? He hasn't found the perfect textbook yet. So up to that point, it ends up being three rolling readings that he thinks touches on different issues he has, of course.
I'm pretty sure that's the case for all the college of sustainability offerings, not just first year, second year, third year. I think we've all, really from prof teams, have just built materials from, I don't think we found anything that's satisfying.
It's funny though, there's so many texts, and I'm continually approached by publishers. They want me to review people's textbooks, because it's a big market. If you can bring a textbook out for a course of 500 students, they make a ton of money. But here we all end up not using the text.
The other issue I run into, I don't know if anybody else has this problem, is if you teach something in the same readings for more than 2 years, suddenly the assignments look suspiciously the same, especially if you're drawing from the readings. So I end up rotating my readings every year, literally, so that they have to do a little bit more work to plagiarize or borrow other people's papers. I don't know if it's just an active underground, but if I rotate readings, I'm not seeing the same things. It forces the students to actually do the work.
Okay, graduate level. Anybody got a thought or a question in terms of curriculum at the graduate level? In my experience, everything's so much easier at the graduate level. You don't worry about it.
I think we struggle with our introductory master's level course more than any other course that we have.
Why? Why is it harder?
Well, Tim is teaching it.
Yeah, it's because for those of you who are here from Barbara's presentation, we have this individualized program where you're basically creating your own plan of study. And so part of that core, for a long time, has been framed primarily around giving students the resources and skills and going through the process of developing your own plan of study. But when you do that, you end up having a bunch of students, 100, we have an income class of about 120 or so, you end up having 120 students going off in different directions, and it's like, well, what actually connects us? A bunch of individualized plans of study, it's like, well, that's problematic as well. So one of the things that I've been trying to do in the course is to make the course more 50-50, where you have, you're spending 50% of your time thinking about the individualized plan of study that you're doing, but the other 50% of the time you're thinking about how your particular interest is connecting with everybody else's. And so one of the ways that I've been trying to do that is by having, by showing the way in which faculty's interests can overlap around various issues. So we have, so we'll do a thing on what is interdisciplinarity. We'll have an environmental scientist. We'll have somebody come from a humanities perspective, somebody come from a social science perspective, and we'll have a discussion on that. What is environmental? The first class is what is environmental studies, and for that, last year we did a dean's panel, former dean's panel. So we had 4 different deans or from the history of FES talking about what is environmental studies over time, and then we're also doing particular topics. So no growth or steady state this year as a way that you can approach that from an economics perspective. We have Peter Victor with his recent book, but you can also approach it from the humanities. There's a whole history there thinking about no growth, steady state from the humanities, from the social science, and the whole idea is to make sure students realize that while you're doing your individual thing, all of your stuff actually interconnects. And so we also have activities. So some of the activities will be mapping exercises where they read each other's parts of their plan of study, and they actually try to find some of the two key elements. They map them on, and they have to connect how all those elements interconnect by different ways. So you realize that while you're doing your individual thing, you do have your own individual interests. You are not on your own, and all of our issues interconnect. And so I think that the big issue in our program has always been, and I'm talking about this not just from somebody who's teaching it, but somebody who went through this course and doesn't remember it. Because what I remember is just doing the plan of study. And there is core content that does have to be thought about. And I think we are just getting this conference in a sense represents this kind of question of what is environmental studies, what is interdisciplinarity, how do we do that? And those are the kinds of questions I think that we're starting to get to. At least that's where the trajectory I'm taking the course is thinking about how do we do that to a certain extent, and how we can create a balance. But it's a unique program in the sense that the problems are related to how the program is created, and how do we bring that individualized approach and then get some commonality together.
Okay, other experiences with graduate. We've got Mark and then Paul.
At the University of Toronto, what has been an environmental decision-making course as the common, gatekeeper course. It's the one requirement for doing the collaborative program in environmental studies, and I'd say it's actually been, at least in my experience, a somewhat problematic course. The theory behind it is good. It's supposed to bring together the science and the social science and humanities people to get environmental decision making as kind of a concrete, I think, kind of case study approach, which I think in theory that's a good approach. I think the way it had been taught, at least the year that I had it, was very technical and kind of without any of the broader philosophical. Well, Ingrid Stefanovic, who normally had co-taught the course the year I did it, she was on sabbatical, so she did two sessions, both of which were great, but it was two classes in a whole course. So what tended to happen, what tends to happen, I know at Boise where I'm based, people are actually almost told not to do environmental studies because of that course. I got that advice. I disregarded. I said I'll grit my teeth and do it because I want to do environmental studies, and it was a bit of a grit my teeth and do it sort of thing. I did well in the course, but I didn't enjoy it. So I think it's really important to have a good graduate, introductory course, which yes, it should integrate science and humanities, social science approach, but to do it in a way that's really integral. And I think that really, especially at the graduate level, some of the kind of environmental philosophy pieces really are kind of key to give a framework about how do we think about environmental studies. And while that was, the two sessions with Ingrid gave a bit of that, I mean, I could have imagined a lot more of that, and maybe in other years where she co-taught, that was more there. But I still think it's something that needs to be kept in mind.
Okay, Paul.
Yeah, I just wanted to make explicit at least one factor I see, Barbara suggested, is why the master's course is so difficult. It's because the students come from disciplinary backgrounds. Very, very few of our students come from environmental studies or an interdisciplinary background. So we try to, in one course, well, get them to think about what are we about, what does sustainability mean, what are approaches to it, how might we work together. We also, in a related course, try to give them experience of working in teams. We do believe that when we get out in the real world, they're going to be working in teams, not as individuals, and to recognize diversity of opinions and how they can contribute and play off ideas.
Okay, any other comments on graduate?
Yeah, so, there are a couple issues. One, of course, is the core graduate course, and that's a special animal. And the other is graduate courses in general in terms of environment, with the diversity of people coming through. And I've never taught the core course, so I can't really speak out of experience with that one. But in my own graduate courses, which often have people from different disciplines, one thing that I find very useful is that it becomes almost, when it gels, it becomes like a think tank almost. I mean, in terms of commonality, there's always a text that the students read for each week, and they have to write one page on that text with critical questions, so that they're all on the same page, even if they're coming from engineering or from anthropology or from geology, and they're all wrestling with that. But then it just becomes open to the university itself. And for example, Tim came into my graduate seminar last term and did this wonderful tour of the campus, an environmental history of the U of T campus and Tattle Creek being buried, etc. And one student said, after that, I just stayed. It was a beautiful day. And after the class left, he just stayed and read an entire book at the former Tattle Creek because of Tim's presentation. So it's finding ways to connect. And secondly, with their major research projects, at least I try to have them tie the environmental themes with what they're doing, whether it's in dramatic arts or English literature or physics, that they're relating this to something that is pertinent to their discipline, so that they have a kind of different perspective and embellishment and broadening, but it's still rooted in some things that they're interested in. So those are some things that I found helpful.
Okay.
Just to come back on your comment earlier, I think in our thesis-based master's program, the one course that continues to bedevil us as a professoriate is research methods. Is it one term? Is it 2 terms? Is it theory and concept? Is it
at the graduate level?
At the graduate level. So at the thesis, graduate level. That's what how do we do that? Because again, we have such diverse interests and backgrounds. And usually it's the natural scientists want to do social science, and the social scientists want to do natural science, and so you got this. So we don't, I think where we end up defaulting is to a broader conceptual approach to how to want to take research without really worrying about any of the specific tools or techniques any of them need, and then leave it largely to the supervisors and committees to bolt the stuff on it. It's not.
Yeah, can there be a specifically environmental studies approach to methodology? Question.
I'll just share the Waterloo experience on that. Having just recently had teach the methods course for grad students, second time I've been in the last 5 or 6 years. You can't have this week is this method. That's not going to work, especially for students who don't know what this question is yet. So I approached it as, what are the commonalities? What's the basic concept of framing a good question, creating evidence, and evaluating whether you have sufficient evidence, reliable evidence, and so on. And that's all conceptual. Students, of course, ask, where's the method?
Yeah.
So I do one for those who are interested on basic introduction to social science methods, particularly around questions of sampling. And for the other, for physical ones, again, sampling, maybe some basic statistical concept. And I said, it's up to your advisor. Your advisor knows your topic. What you want to do, you work it out with him. And if your advisor's too lazy to give you the methods, force them to. We have some people who are very good at making sure their students use appropriate methodology.
Okay, have to be very quick. Yeah.
we did two things. One at the master's level, we realized the one thing, because we have a broad interdisciplinary program, the graduate students need to do is communication. And so I taught the intro seminars of communication, where I brought people in and they had to present to different people. Whatever their discipline, they had to present to a First Nation, they had to present to press, they had to present to, themselves, each other kind of thing. And so learning to present to different people worked out, especially when the CDC person said, come in, do interviews with us. And they got on radio. At the PhD level, we value interdisciplinary enough that we actually not only teach courses, but then we require the students to do preliminary exams. So all of them, before they write their defense, actually have to write a series of exams based on interdisciplinary courses. And if they don't actually pass the exams based on the interdisciplinary courses, which included materials from sciences and social sciences and humanities, so whatever you're going to do in your dissertation, you have to be able to ground it in interdisciplinary. I got to say, the students hate it, and their supervisors hate it worse. But at the end of it, they actually understand where their thing, whatever it is they're doing, fits within a broader base, because they actually have to write exams on it to get to their dissertation defense proposal. So it's a grind. I'm not looking forward to inheriting it next year, but we're turning out some pretty decent students because they have to take it seriously, even if their supervisors don't know to.
Interesting. Okay, we've only got about 5 minutes or so, and then we're going to break, and then we're going to come back down to Michael's presentation. So in terms of organization, of how the university is organized to offer interdisciplinary environmental studies, I was thinking one way to introduce this, we've got here in today's event, or today and yesterday's, sort of the two extremes. We've got York, which is a full faculty, and then we had Julie here from the Université Laval, which I happen to know, which does not have any interdisciplinary standalone units. Instead, it's all located within existing departments. But it does have the Hydro-Quebec Sustainable Development Institute, but it's a research-only institute, so there's no teaching involved. So those are the sort of the two extremes, and then in between, you've got this question of how you marry teaching and research in the organizational structure. And then you've got, I guess, that what Inga was talking about yesterday from the U of T experience of something called a center or whatever, but which has connections to departments. But then also the thing that we were talking about for a while at U of T, we were talking about possibly a merger with geography, and there were some people within geography suggesting you could have an interdisciplinary department. I kept saying, oh, you couldn't be a department because departments are discipline-based. And so Scott Prudhomme came back and said, well, but why should they be? Why couldn't you have it to have actual, and within the university pecking order, departmental status is pretty good. So you've got this array of possible organizational structures, and it all comes down to the question of the relationship to the discipline-based departments. And it comes down to competition for students and resources. You just can't get around that. So I'm throwing it open to any comments people have got based on their experience in their university with an organizational structure that either works or doesn't work.
And I'll just add before we go, just recap some of the issues that were raised yesterday that were related to this, just to remind everybody that there was the question of the corporatization of the university and neoliberalization, the kind of pressures it creates on these units within the university context, budgetary issues and impact on curriculum, program philosophy, which Paul referred to in his presentation this morning, in practice, university debt download the programs, and undergrad territoriality. So that's just the context that we've been thinking about that we've already been touching on.
We can only touch on this because we are running short of time, but we're open to any comments people have got.
Sure. I'll start and say that I think having faculty status is a tremendous advantage, and it's something we fight to maintain all the time. And we're the smallest faculty at York, with 40 faculty members. That's compared to liberal arts and professional studies, which has, it's half the university. It has, more if it was a standalone university, it would be the 5th largest in Canada. It's enormous. And so the issue of resources is like, being the mouse invented the elephant, and constantly trying to feel like you're demanding faculty status. And it's a way of really preserving our ability to do what we think needs to be done, and constantly changing curriculum, and which is, without a lot of interference, outside interference.
And you've got the power that comes from the institutional structure of your equivalent in a formal sense.
That's right. I sit at the dean's table with the dean of liberal arts and special studies. Yeah.
That's incredible power. At U of T, for the last 20 or 30 years, since the idea was first floated of creating a faculty, it's been continually rejected, and our understanding is by the Faculty of Arts and Science, which does not want to see anything like that come into being. So then the question is, could you get departmental status, which would give you some kind of institutional clout? Anybody want to speak to their experience? Just tell us what is your organizational structure here, and then housing.
Well, we had an environmental studies program, and for a variety of reasons, it was actually broken up into 3 degrees, and 3 degrees were handed around. The problem we're having in terms of environmental studies is, while there is a BA program situated in another degree within a program, there are lots of other programs who say, but we also teach environmental studies. And so there's a tension between people in other departments and programs who want to teach it, and the fact we actually have an environmental studies degree. And it's gotten to the point where people have literally tried to poach the degree. I'll come in one morning and somebody says, oh, I've asked for you and your degree to be moved over here to this college or to this program, or we want you and we're taking you. I guess it's good to be wanted, but I kind of like to buy me lunch first, at least. But I think increasingly, as people see, and the reason it is because people see environmental studies as a valuable thing and they want it for themselves, or because they think they do it, and so they want to add to the resources. And I think as budgets get tighter and faculty goes away, but we also see environmental studies as it's potentially a growth area. It will come back up again. That there will be a competition. Why only in environmental studies? We do it here. And I think that's going to be an ongoing tension as to how you offer it, who gets the resources. And even if you are focused in there, there's probably somebody in liberal studies thinking, well, I got a degree in environmental studies and I teach environmental philosophy. Why can't we do it here? Why should we? Yeah, so there's that concentration versus disbursement that is going to be an ongoing issue as budgets in universities contract in resources as to who gets the glory of it, that at some point must be thought through, or YouTube will end up being handed around for lunch.
We have, I think it's a similar tension. Our history is 73. A school was established. It was a standalone unit within a broader university, not affiliated with any one faculty. It existed like that until a period of financial constraints being imposed on the university externally, and they went around with a cutting torch and welded together a bunch of before independent schools into a new faculty of management. So our sister schools are business, public admin, and then over time, then Faculty of Science instituted an environmental science program that's understaffed but has huge numbers of students relative to the professoriate there. And we look across the campus at each other and think, we relate more to each other than to the broader units within which we're embedded. But how do we reach you? And so we look to Waterloo and York with envy, thinking, we have to all be in one roof, under one roof.
Here, and then I think we're going to wrap up.
At University of Winnipeg, we have an environmental studies advisory committee advising us. And that committee, we have the chairs from different departments, from philosophy, sociology, politics, chemistry, biology, so many. And because of that, there's no tension.
So these chairs are on some sort of an advisory committee?
They are in our advisory committee. We meet every 2 months, and they are involved in our curriculum development. And whenever we take the courses we take from chemistry, they're required for environmental studies students. We have courses required like environmental ethics from philosophy is a required course for all environmental studies students. No tension, they like us because their enrollments are high because of us.
Okay, unless anybody's got something else they absolutely want to say on this subject, I think what I'm going to do is suggest that we adjourn